Hey, beloved, if your heart is heavy tonight, if the weight of today feels too much to bear, you've found exactly where you need to be. I know you're tired. I know you've been carrying burdens that weren't meant for your shoulders alone. I know you've been fighting battles that have left you weary and worn down, but here's what I want you to know right now. You don't have to carry it all anymore. Tonight, we're going to discover something powerful together. We're going to explore how the ancient words of the Psalms can become your refuge, your comfort, and your peace when everything else feels chaotic. These aren't just old poems written thousands of years ago. These are living, breathing prayers that speak directly to the deepest parts of your soul, especially when you're at your breaking point. But before we dive in, I need you to do something for me. I need you to take a deep breath, just one. Let your shoulders drop. Feel the tension start to release. Because what we're about to discover together isn't just about reading beautiful words, it's about finding genuine rest for your weary spirit. You see, there's something remarkable that happens when we turn to the Psalms during our darkest moments. These ancient prayers have this incredible ability to meet us exactly where we are. Whether you're dealing with anxiety that keeps you up at night, grief that feels unbearable, loneliness that cuts deep, or just the overwhelming stress of trying to keep it all together, the Psalms have words for you. Or, I've spent years studying these texts, counseling people through their deepest struggles, and I can tell you this with absolute certainty. There is no emotion too raw, no pain too deep, no fear too overwhelming that the Psalms cannot address. King David, who wrote many of these prayers, knew what it felt like to be hunted by enemies, to feel abandoned by friends, to wrestle with depression and despair. He understood the human condition in all its messiness and beauty. Tonight, we're going to walk through 7 specific psalms that have the power to transform your heaviest burdens into hope. But this isn't going to be your typical Bible study. We're going to dive deep into the original language, uncover hidden meanings that might change everything you thought you knew about these passages, and discover practical ways to let these ancient words breathe new life into your weary soul. Here's what makes this different from anything else you might have heard before. I'm going to show you how to pray these psalms in a way that actually shifts something inside you. We're not just going to read them. We're going to learn how to internalize them, how to let them rewire the anxious thoughts in your mind, how to use them as spiritual medicine for whatever wound you're carrying tonight. The first thing you need to understand is that the Psalms were never meant to be read in silence. They were sung, chanted, cried out in desperation, whispered in hope. They're meant to be felt, not just understood intellectually. When you really grasp this, it changes everything about how you approach these sacred texts. Think about it this way. When you're in pain, you don't need someone to give you a theology lesson. You need someone to sit with you in that pain, to understand it, to help carry it. That's exactly what the Psalms do. They don't minimize your struggles or tell you to just have more faith. They acknowledge the reality of human suffering while pointing you toward hope that's real and lasting. I remember working with Sarah, a young mother who was drowning in postpartum depression. She felt like she was failing everyone, her husband, her children, herself. The guilt was crushing her. When we started reading Psalm 139 together, something shifted. As we got to the verse that says, "You knit me together in my mother's womb," she began to understand that even in her darkest moments, she was still fearfully and wonderfully made. The psalm didn't cure her depression overnight, but it gave her a foundation of truth to stand on when the lies felt overwhelming. Or think about Marcus, a businessman who lost everything in the economic downturn. His identity was wrapped up in his success, and when that was stripped away, he didn't know who he was anymore. Psalm 46 became his lifeline. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. He learned to find his security not in his bank account or his title, but in something unshakable. These aren't just feel-good stories. This is the real power of the Psalms when we approach them correctly. They have the ability to reach into the deepest parts of our pain and plant seeds of hope that grow into genuine transformation. But here's where most people get it wrong. They treat the Psalms like spiritual band-aids, quick fixes for temporary relief. That's not how they're meant to work. The Psalms are more like spiritual physical therapy. They require patience, consistency, and a willingness to do the inner work of healing. Tonight, we're going to start with what I call the foundation psalm, Psalm 23. You probably think you know this one. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. But I'm going to show you layers of meaning in these familiar words that might completely reshape how you see God's care for you. We're going to discover why David chose the metaphor of a shepherd, what it meant in ancient Middle Eastern culture, and how understanding that context can bring comfort to specific struggles you're facing right now. Then we're going to move to Psalm 42, which starts with those haunting words, "As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God." This is the psalm for anyone who feels spiritually dry, who's lost their sense of connection with the divine, who's going through the motions but feeling empty inside. We're going to unpack what it really means to thirst for God and how to find those streams of living water even in the driest seasons of life. From there, we'll explore Psalm 91, often called the security psalm. If you're dealing with fear of the future, fear of failure, fear of loss, this psalm contains promises that can literally rewire your anxious thoughts. But we're not going to treat it like some kind of magical incantation. We're going to understand what these promises mean, when they apply, and how to hold on to them when everything around you feels uncertain. But perhaps the most powerful section will be when we dive into Psalm 22. This is the psalm Jesus quoted on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me?" If you've ever felt abandoned by God, if you've wondered where He is in your pain, this psalm will meet you in that dark place and show you a path forward. We're going to see how this psalm moves from desperation to hope, from isolation to community, from questions to trust. What I love about the Psalms is their raw honesty. David doesn't pretend everything is fine when it's not. He brings his real emotions, anger, fear, confusion, doubt, right into his conversations with God. He gives us permission to be human while still holding on to faith. This is so different from the sanitized spirituality we often encounter today, where we're supposed to smile and say we're blessed no matter what we're going through. The Psalms show us that authentic faith includes wrestling with hard questions, expressing difficult emotions, and sometimes sitting in the tension of not having all the answers. Here's what we're going to discover together. The Psalms aren't just ancient literature to be admired from a distance. They're meant to become the vocabulary of your heart, the words you reach for when your own words fail you. They're meant to teach you how to cry out to God, how to find hope in darkness, how to remember His faithfulness when everything feels uncertain. And here's the beautiful thing. You don't have to have perfect faith to benefit from these prayers. You don't have to understand every theological concept or have your life together. The Psalms meet you exactly where you are, in all your brokenness and confusion, and they show you that even in your weakness, you are not alone. As we begin this journey together, I want you to know that whatever brought you here tonight, whatever burden you're carrying, whatever pain you're feeling, whatever fear is keeping you awake, it's not too big for God's love to handle. The Psalms will show you that over and over again. So settle in, take another deep breath, and prepare to discover how these ancient words can become fresh bread for your hungry soul. We're about to explore not just what these Psalms say, but how they can fundamentally change the way you process pain, find peace, and experience the presence of God in your everyday life. Your healing starts now, and it starts with understanding that you don't have to carry today's burdens into tomorrow. The Psalms are about to show you how to lay them down. Let me start by taking you to a place where many of us find ourselves, that 3 a.m. moment when sleep won't come because your mind is racing with worries. Maybe it's the conversation that went wrong, the deadline you're not sure you can meet, or that persistent ache in your chest that you can't quite name. This is where Psalm 3 becomes more than just words on a page. It becomes your lifeline. David wrote this psalm when he was literally running for his life. His own son Absalom was trying to kill him, his kingdom was crumbling, and everyone he trusted had turned against him. Yet listen to what he says, "I lie down and sleep. I wake again, because the Lord sustains me." Think about that for a moment. In the middle of the worst betrayal of his life, David found a way to sleep peacefully. But here's what most people miss when they read this psalm quickly. The Hebrew word David uses for sustains is samak. It means to lean against, to be supported by something stronger than yourself. It's the image of an exhausted traveler finally finding a sturdy tree to rest against after walking for days. David is saying that even when everything around him was unstable, he found something unshakable to lean into. This is what I want you to understand tonight. You have that same tree to lean against. When your mind won't quiet down, when the problems feel bigger than your ability to solve them, when you feel like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, there's a strength available to you that's bigger than your circumstances. Now let's move deeper into this concept because I need you to grasp something crucial. The Psalms don't work like positive thinking or self-help mantras. They work by connecting you to a reality that's more true than whatever you're experiencing in the moment. When David says, "The Lord is my shepherd," he's not trying to convince himself of something that might be true. He's declaring something that is true, regardless of how he feels. This is where we encounter Psalm 139, and I need to prepare you for something that might completely shift your perspective. When you're drowning in shame, when you feel like you've made too many mistakes, when that voice in your head keeps telling you that you're not enough, this psalm becomes a mirror that shows you who you really are. The verse that stops most people in their tracks is this: "You have searched me, Lord, and you know me." That word searched in Hebrew is chakar. It means to examine thoroughly, like a doctor who studies every detail of an X-ray to understand what's really happening inside. God knows every thought you've tried to hide, every mistake you've made, every fear that keeps you up at night. He sees it all, and here's the remarkable part: he's not horrified by what he finds. The psalm continues, "Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain." David is saying that being fully known by God isn't something to fear, it's something to marvel at. It's wonderful. Think about what that means for you right now. All those things you're ashamed of, all those ways you think you've failed, all those parts of yourself you try to keep hidden. God sees them all, and his response is love, not judgment. But let's go even deeper, because this is where the real transformation happens. The psalm tells us we're fearfully and wonderfully made. That phrase, fearfully made, doesn't mean God was scared when he made you. The Hebrew word yer means with reverence, with awe, with the kind of careful attention an artist gives to their masterpiece. You weren't thrown together hastily. You were crafted with intentionality, with purpose, with divine attention to detail. When Sarah, the young mother I mentioned earlier, really grasped this truth, something fundamental shifted inside her. She stopped seeing herself as a collection of failures and started seeing herself as God's intentional creation. The depression didn't disappear overnight, but she had a foundation of truth to stand on when the lies tried to drag her down. This brings us to one of the most powerful healing mechanisms in the Psalms. They teach us how to argue with our own thoughts. Psalm 42 demonstrates this beautifully. The psalmist starts by saying, "Why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me?" He's literally having a conversation with his own emotional state, refusing to let his feelings have the final word. But notice what he does next. He doesn't try to talk himself out of feeling sad. Instead, he reminds his soul of truth. "Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Savior and my God." This is the art of lament, And it's something our culture has forgotten how to do. We either suppress difficult emotions or let them completely overwhelm us. The Psalms show us a third way. We acknowledge the pain while anchoring ourselves to hope. This is particularly powerful when we look at Psalm 88, which might be the darkest chapter in the entire Bible. The psalmist says things like, "I am overwhelmed with troubles and my life draws near to death. And you have taken from me friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend." This psalm ends without resolution, without a happy ending, without everything being tied up in a neat bow. Why would God include such a dark prayer in Scripture? Because sometimes that's exactly where you are. Sometimes you need permission to say, "This is really hard, and I can't see the light at the end of the tunnel right now." The Psalms give you that permission while simultaneously reminding you that even in the darkness, you're not praying alone. Here's what I've discovered after years of walking with people through their deepest pain. The Psalms don't promise to remove your problems, but they promise to change your posture toward them. When you learn to pray these ancient prayers, you stop being a victim of your circumstances and become someone who can find God even in the midst of them. Let me show you what this looks like practically. When anxiety starts to spiral, instead of fighting it or giving into it, you can turn to Psalm 94:19. "When anxiety was great within me, your consolation brought me joy." You're not denying the anxiety. You're acknowledging it while reaching for consolation that's bigger than the fear. When you feel alone and abandoned, you can pray Psalm 27:10. "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me." You're not pretending the loneliness doesn't hurt. You're declaring that human rejection isn't the end of your story. When you're overwhelmed by how much you have to do, you can breathe Psalm 55:22. "Cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken." You're not denying the pressure. You're learning to transfer the weight to someone who can actually handle it. This is what I call the theology of the trenches. Faith that works when life gets messy, when the easy answers fall apart, when you need something more substantial than positive thinking. The Psalms were written by people who knew what it felt like to be in those trenches, and they point us toward a God who meets us there. But here's where it gets even more beautiful. The Psalms don't just help us cope with difficulty, they actually transform us through it. They teach us that our pain has purpose, that our struggles can become the soil where deeper faith grows, that our broken places can become the very spots where God's light shines through most brightly. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's more like watching a Polaroid picture slowly develop. At first you can't see anything clearly, but gradually the image becomes more and more distinct. As you consistently turn to these ancient prayers, as you let them become the soundtrack of your heart, you'll start to notice subtle shifts in how you respond to stress, how you process disappointment, how you find hope in dark seasons. The key is understanding that the Psalms work on multiple levels simultaneously. They provide immediate comfort for acute pain, but they also gradually rewire your thinking patterns, strengthen your spiritual muscles, and deepen your capacity to trust God, even when you can't see His hand at work. This is why I'm so passionate about helping you discover not just what the Psalms say, but how to let them do their transformative work in your life. We're about to dive into specific techniques that will help you move beyond simply reading these prayers to actually praying them in ways that create lasting change. Your heart is about to discover what it means to truly rest, even when the storm around you hasn't stopped raging. The first technique I want to teach you is what I call praying the Psalms with your body. This might sound strange at first, but hear me out. The Hebrew people understood something we've forgotten in our modern world, that our physical posture affects our spiritual posture. When David talks about lifting his hands in prayer, bowing down in worship, or lying prostrate before God, these weren't just poetic expressions. They were intentional physical acts that helped align his heart with his prayers. When you're carrying heavy burdens, your body often reflects that weight. Your shoulders hunch forward, your breathing becomes shallow, tension builds in your neck and jaw. The Psalms invite you to interrupt these physical patterns as a way of interrupting the emotional and spiritual patterns that keep you trapped in cycles of worry and despair. Let me walk you through this with Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Instead of just reading these words, try actually lifting your eyes. Look up from whatever screen or page you're reading from. Feel your chin rise, notice how your chest opens, observe how this simple physical act creates space for deeper breathing. There's something profound that happens when you embody these prayers. Your nervous system begins to shift from a state of stress to a state of receptivity. Your body starts to remember what it feels like to reach for help instead of carrying everything alone. This isn't just spiritual symbolism, it's practical neuroscience. When you change your physical posture, you literally change your brain chemistry. I remember teaching this technique to David, a war veteran struggling with PTSD. The hypervigilance and anxiety had become so ingrained that he couldn't relax, even when he was completely safe. We started with Psalm 46, "Be still and know that I am God." But instead of just thinking about being still, we practiced it. We would sit in complete stillness for just 30 seconds at a time, letting his body learn what safety felt like again. The breakthrough came when he realized that be still wasn't a suggestion, it was an invitation. God wasn't demanding that he stop being anxious. God was offering him a place of refuge where he could lay down the burden of constant vigilance. His body began to remember what it felt like to truly rest, and that physical memory became the foundation for emotional and spiritual healing. The second technique builds on this foundation, but goes deeper into what I call narrative therapy through the Psalms. Every person carrying heavy burdens is also carrying a story about those burdens. Maybe your story is, "I'm not strong enough to handle this," or "God has forgotten about me," or "I deserve this pain because of my past mistakes." These stories feel true because you've been living them for so long, but the Psalms offer you a different narrative to step into. Psalm 103 is particularly powerful for this kind of work. He does not treat us as our sins deserve or repay us according to our iniquities. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. When you're stuck in a story of shame and self-condemnation, these words aren't just comfort, they're an alternative reality. But here's the key. You have to practice stepping into this new story the same way an actor practices stepping into a character. At first it might feel foreign, even false, but as you consistently choose to believe this version of your story over the one shame is telling you, something remarkable happens. The new story starts to feel more true than the old one. This process requires what I call holy imagination. When David writes about God as a shepherd in Psalm 23, he's not just using a metaphor, he's painting a picture that your soul can step into. Close your eyes for a moment and really see yourself as a sheep in this story. You're not the strong one, not the one in control, not the one responsible for finding the way. You're simply the one being led to green pastures and still waters. Feel what it would be like to trust the shepherd completely, to know that even in the valley of the shadow of death, you don't have to be afraid because you're not walking alone. This isn't escapism, this is truth training. You're teaching your heart to recognize realities that are more substantial than your current circumstances. The third technique involves understanding the rhythm of lament and praise that runs through so many of the Psalms. Western culture tends to see emotions as problems to be solved rather than experiences to be processed. We want to get from sadness to happiness as quickly as possible, from fear to confidence without stopping in between. But the Psalms teach us that healthy spirituality includes the full spectrum of human emotion processed in the presence of God. Look at how Psalm 13 moves through this rhythm, How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? This is raw, honest lament. David isn't pretending to be okay when he's not. He's bringing his real pain directly to God. But notice how the psalm doesn't stay there. It moves toward trust. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. This isn't a denial of the pain. It's a movement through the pain toward hope. The lament doesn't disappear. It gets transformed. When you learn to follow this rhythm in your own prayer life, you discover something liberating. You don't have to have your emotions figured out before you come to God. You can bring the mess, the confusion, the raw hurt, and trust that God can handle it all. In fact, this kind of honest prayer often leads to breakthrough in ways that sanitized, appropriate prayers never do. I think about Maria, a single mother who had been trying to hold it all together for so long that she'd forgotten how to cry. When we started reading the Lament Psalms together, at first she was uncomfortable with their intensity. "I can't say things like that to God," she would protest. But gradually she began to see that David's honesty wasn't irreverent. It was intimate. It was the kind of raw authenticity that only happens in the safest relationships. The day she finally let herself cry while praying Psalm 13, something broke open inside her. Not broke apart, but broke open, like a dam that had been holding back years of unexpressed grief and fear. The tears weren't the end of her healing, they were the beginning. She had finally found a place where she could be completely honest about how hard her life was, and that honesty became the foundation for genuine hope. This brings us to the fourth technique, which is learning to pray the Psalms as intercession for others. One of the most beautiful things about these ancient prayers is how they expand our capacity for empathy. When you've experienced God's comfort in Psalm 23, you become someone who can offer that same comfort to others. When you've found strength in Psalm 46, you become a source of strength for people who are still learning to trust. Psalm 82 challenges us to defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. But you can't give what you haven't received. The Psalms first heal your own heart so that you can become a healing presence for others. This is where the personal becomes political, where individual transformation leads to social transformation. As you learn to find your identity in God's love rather than in your achievements or others' approval, you become free to truly see and serve the people around you. Your own healing becomes a gift you can offer to a hurting world. But this kind of intercession requires wisdom. You can't pray for others from a place of emptiness or burnout. The Psalms teach us that caring for our own souls isn't selfish. It's necessary. Psalm 1 talks about being like a tree planted by streams of water whose leaf does not wither. You have to stay connected to your source of life if you want to bear fruit that nourishes others. The fifth technique involves what I call memorizing with your heart, not just your head. In ancient Hebrew culture, memorization wasn't about mental gymnastics. It was about internalization. When you truly know a psalm by heart, it becomes available to you in moments when you can't think clearly, when you're too overwhelmed to find the right words, when you need immediate access to truth. But heart memorization is different from rote memorization. It involves engaging your emotions, your imagination, your physical senses. When you're learning Psalm 91, don't just repeat the words until you can recite them. Picture yourself dwelling in the shelter of the Most High. Feel what it would be like to rest in the shadow of the Almighty. Imagine what it means to say, "He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust." This kind of deep internalization means that these truths become part of your automatic response system. When fear tries to overwhelm you, instead of spiraling into panic, your heart immediately goes to, "He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge." When you feel abandoned, you instinctively remember, "He will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways." And I've seen this work powerfully with people facing chronic illness, job loss, relationship breakdowns, and every other kind of crisis you can imagine. When the Psalms are truly written on your heart, they become your first response to difficulty rather than your last resort. They shape how you interpret challenges, how you respond to setbacks, how you find hope when circumstances look hopeless. This is the difference between knowing about God and knowing God. The Psalms become a bridge between intellectual knowledge and heart knowledge, between believing in God's love and experiencing it as a living reality that transforms how you navigate every aspect of your life. As we prepare to dive into specific Psalms that address your deepest needs, I want you to understand that what we're embarking on together isn't just a Bible study, it's spiritual surgery. These ancient prayers are going to reach into the wounded places of your heart and begin a healing process that might take time, but will ultimately set you free from burdens you were never meant to carry alone. The sixth technique is what I call praying the Psalms through your seasons. Your relationship with these ancient prayers will deepen as you learn to match them to the specific season of struggle you're walking through. This isn't about finding a quick fix or a spiritual prescription. It's about discovering which Psalms resonate most powerfully with your current reality. When you're in a season of waiting, when you've prayed for something for months or years and nothing seems to change, Psalm 27 becomes your companion. Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. But notice that this isn't passive waiting. It's active, expectant waiting. It's the difference between sitting in a waiting room with no idea when you'll be called and waiting at the airport gate, knowing your flight will eventually board. The Hebrew word for wait here is kava, which means to bind together by twisting, like making a rope. When you wait for the Lord, you're not just passing time, you're being woven together with His purposes in ways you can't see yet. Your waiting isn't wasted time, it's preparation time, it's character-building time, it's trust-deepening time. I remember counseling Jennifer through one of the longest seasons of waiting I've ever witnessed. She and her husband had been trying to have children for 8 years. 8 years of doctor appointments, failed treatments, dashed hopes, and well-meaning friends asking when they were going to start a family. She came to me angry at God, convinced He had forgotten her, ready to give up on faith altogether. We started meeting weekly to pray through Psalm 27 together. At first, she could barely get through the words without breaking down. I remained confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Those words felt like lies in her mouth, but gradually something shifted. She began to understand that seeing God's goodness didn't necessarily mean getting what she wanted when she wanted it. It meant learning to recognize His presence and love, even in the midst of unfulfilled longing. The breakthrough came when she realized that her identity wasn't tied to becoming a mother. It was tied to being God's beloved daughter. That shift didn't immediately result in pregnancy, but it resulted in peace. She found herself able to hold her desire for children with an open hand rather than clenched fists. And eventually, in ways she never expected, God did fulfill that desire. But by then, she had already found the deeper gift of trusting Him regardless of outcomes. When you're in a season of loss, when grief feels like it might consume you, Psalm 34 offers a different kind of comfort. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. The word close here is karab, which means to draw near, to approach, to come alongside. God doesn't stand at a distance offering platitudes about your pain. He draws near. He comes close enough to feel your tears, to hear your gasping sobs, to sit with you in the darkness. This is radically different from our culture's approach to grief, which often rushes people through the process or offers empty assurances that everything happens for a reason. The Psalms don't minimize loss or try to explain it away. They acknowledge that some things in this broken world are genuinely tragic, and they offer us a God who grieves with us rather than one who remains emotionally distant from our pain. When you're in a season of overwhelming responsibility, when you feel like you're drowning in obligations and everyone needs something from you, Psalm 55 becomes your lifeline. Cast your cares on the Lord, and He will sustain you. But here's what most people miss. The Hebrew word for cast is shalak, which means to hurl, to throw with force. This isn't a gentle suggestion to politely hand over your worries. It's permission to throw them at God with all the force of your frustration and exhaustion. Picture a person so overwhelmed by the weight of what they're carrying that they finally just drop everything and walk away. That's the kind of radical release the psalm is describing. You're not being irresponsible by casting your cares on God. You're being honest about your limitations and wise about where to find help that actually works. The seventh technique involves learning to pray the psalms in community, even when you feel completely alone. Isolation is one of the most dangerous side effects of carrying heavy burdens. When you're struggling, there's a tendency to withdraw, to convince yourself that no one understands, to carry your pain in secret. But the Psalms were originally written for corporate worship. They assume you're part of something bigger than yourself. Even when you're physically alone, when you pray these ancient words, you're joining your voice with millions of others who have found comfort in the same phrases. You're part of a choir that spans centuries and continents, all singing the same song of trust in the midst of trial. This isn't just poetic imagery, it's spiritual reality. Your individual struggle becomes part of a larger story of God's faithfulness to His people. Psalm 133 captures this beautifully. How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar of his robe. The image is of anointing oil that doesn't stay in one place but flows and spreads, touching everything it encounters. When you allow these prayers to anoint your own pain, that healing doesn't stay contained, it flows out to touch others who are hurting. This is why I encourage people to find ways to pray the Psalms with others, even in simple ways. Maybe it's texting a verse to a friend who's going through a hard time. Maybe it's joining a small group that meets weekly to read these prayers together. Maybe it's simply knowing that when you whisper Psalm 23 in your darkest moments, you're echoing words that countless others have whispered in their own dark moments. The eighth and final technique is learning to pray the Psalms as worship, not just as petition. So many of us approach God primarily as a problem solver, only turning to prayer when we need something fixed or changed. But the Psalms teach us that worship, acknowledging God's worth, celebrating His character, expressing gratitude for His goodness, is actually the most powerful posture we can take when we're overwhelmed by life's challenges. Psalm 100 demonstrates this perfectly. Enter His gates with thanksgiving and His courts with praise. Give thanks to Him and praise His name. For the Lord is good, and His love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations. Notice the progression here. You enter with thanksgiving, you move into praise, and the foundation for both is remembering who God is and what He has done. This might seem counterintuitive when you're in pain. How can you praise God when your heart is breaking? How can you give thanks when everything feels like it's falling apart? The answer isn't that you deny your pain or pretend everything is fine. The answer is that you remember truths that are bigger than your current circumstances. When David writes, "Weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning," in Psalm 30, he's not minimizing the reality of the weeping. He's placing it in a larger context. Night is real, but it's not permanent. Dawn is coming. This isn't wishful thinking. It's the pattern of God's character throughout history. He brings beauty from ashes, strength from weakness, joy from sorrow. I think about Robert, a man who lost his wife after 43 years of marriage. The grief was so intense he could barely function. He would sit in his empty house, surrounded by memories, wondering how he was supposed to go on without her. When we started reading Psalm 30 together, at first he was angry. "How can you tell me that rejoicing is coming when I feel like I'm dying inside?" But gradually he began to understand that the psalm wasn't asking him to stop grieving. It was inviting him to grieve within the context of hope. He started keeping a gratitude journal, writing down one small thing each day that reminded him of God's faithfulness. At first, it was difficult. "I woke up this morning," or "someone brought me groceries." But over time, the entries became richer, more specific, more full of genuine thankfulness. The turning point came when he wrote, "I'm grateful that Linda and I had 43 beautiful years together. Not everyone gets that gift." His grief didn't disappear, but it transformed from bitter to sweet, from hopeless to meaningful. He learned to worship God, not despite his loss, but through it, recognizing that even in his pain, he was being held by a love that was stronger than death. These 8 techniques work together to create what I call a psalmic lifestyle, a way of living that's anchored in these ancient truths, regardless of what storms are raging around you. But here's what I need you to understand. This isn't about becoming someone who never struggles or never doubts. It's about becoming someone who knows where to turn when the struggling and doubting come. The Psalms don't promise to eliminate difficulty from your life. What they promise is to give you a vocabulary for navigating difficulty, a framework for finding God in the midst of it, and a community of faith that has walked this path before you. They promise to teach you the difference between happiness, which depends on circumstances, and joy, which runs deeper than circumstances. As we prepare to explore specific psalms that speak to your deepest needs, I want you to approach them not as a desperate person grasping for quick relief, but as someone who is about to discover treasure that has been waiting for you all along. These aren't just words on a page. They're invitations into a different way of being human, a way that acknowledges pain without being destroyed by it, that faces uncertainty without being paralyzed by fear, that experiences loss without losing hope. The transformation that's about to begin in your heart won't happen overnight, but it will happen. And once it does, you'll never be the same. You'll find yourself becoming the kind of person who can carry peace in the midst of chaos, who can offer strength to others from a well that never runs dry, who can face tomorrow with confidence, not because you know what it holds, but because you know who holds it. Your journey from burden bearer to burden releaser is about to begin, and it starts with understanding that the words you're about to encounter aren't just ancient poetry. They're living prayers that have the power to reshape your soul from the inside out. Now let's turn our attention to the first psalm that has the power to completely transform how you process overwhelming circumstances. Psalm 46. This isn't just a collection of comforting words. It's a revolutionary way of understanding your relationship with chaos, uncertainty, and the storms that threaten to sweep you away. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Before we go any further, I need you to pause and really hear what this is saying. The Hebrew word for refuge is machseh, and it doesn't just mean a place to hide. It means a place of confident trust, like a fortress that has never been breached, a shelter that has withstood every storm in history. This isn't about running away from your problems. It's about running to something infinitely stronger than your problems. But here's where it gets interesting. The word ever-present literally means found. God is found in trouble. Not absent from trouble, not standing at a distance from trouble, but found in the very center of it. This completely flips our understanding of where to look for God when life gets overwhelming. We tend to think He's somewhere else, waiting for us to get our act together before He shows up. The psalm is saying He's already there, in the middle of your mess, waiting to be discovered. I want to take you deeper into this, because most people read right past the next verse without understanding its profound implications. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. Think about what David is describing here. This is apocalyptic language, the complete dissolution of everything that seems permanent and stable. Mountains represent the most solid, unchanging things we can imagine. If they're falling into the sea, then literally nothing in the physical world can be counted on. Yet the response isn't panic or despair. It's, "We will not fear." How is that possible? Because the psalm has anchored our security in something that transcends physical reality. When your sense of safety comes from God, rather than from your circumstances staying manageable, you develop what I call unshakable peace, a deep calm that persists even when everything around you is in chaos. Let me tell you about Rachel, an emergency room nurse who discovered this truth during the most stressful period of her career. She was working 16-hour shifts during the pandemic, watching people die, dealing with shortages of everything, coming home exhausted only to worry about bringing the virus to her own family. She felt like she was drowning in an ocean of other people's pain, while her own needs went completely unmet. The breaking point came when she realized she hadn't slept more than 3 hours at a time in weeks. She was making mistakes at work, snapping at her kids, and feeling like she was failing everyone who depended on her. That's when a colleague introduced her to Psalm 46. At first, she was skeptical. How is reading ancient poetry going to help me handle 12 patients at once? But something happened when she started praying this psalm during her short breaks. Instead of trying to find strength within herself to keep going, she began to recognize a source of strength that didn't depend on her getting enough sleep or having manageable circumstances. She learned to take what she calls refuge breaks, 60-second moments where she would close her eyes and remember that God was her fortress, not her ability to hold everything together. The transformation wasn't that her job became easier or her schedule less demanding. The transformation was that she stopped carrying the emotional weight of outcomes she couldn't control. She could give her best to each patient and then release the results, knowing that she was working within a larger purpose that didn't depend on her being superhuman. This brings us to one of the most misunderstood verses in the entire Bible: "Be still and know that I am God." Most people interpret this as a gentle suggestion to find quiet time for meditation, but the Hebrew word rapha is much more forceful than that. It means to cease striving, to let go, to stop fighting. It's not a whisper, it's a command. God is essentially saying, stop, put down your weapons. Quit trying to control outcomes that are beyond your control. Remember who's really in charge here. This isn't passivity. It's the most active thing you can do when you're overwhelmed. It's actively choosing to transfer responsibility for outcomes from your shoulders to God's. It's actively deciding to trust that there's a wisdom at work that's bigger than your understanding. It's actively releasing your death grip on circumstances you were never meant to control in the first place. I think about Mark, a small business owner who nearly had a nervous breakdown trying to keep his company afloat during the economic uncertainty. He was working 18-hour days, refinancing his house, borrowing against his retirement, doing everything humanly possible to save the business his father had built. The stress was literally killing him. His doctor warned him that his blood pressure was dangerously high and he was headed for a heart attack if he didn't find a way to manage the pressure. When Mark first encountered "Be still and know that I am God," his initial reaction was anger. I can't be still. If I stop fighting for this business, we'll lose everything. But gradually he began to understand that being still didn't mean being inactive. It meant being active from a place of trust rather than from a place of panic. It meant making decisions based on wisdom rather than fear. It meant working hard while holding outcomes with an open hand. The shift happened when he realized that his identity wasn't tied to saving the business. It was tied to being God's son, regardless of what happened to the company. He could give his best effort to finding solutions while simultaneously trusting that his worth as a person didn't depend on the outcome. Paradoxically, when he stopped trying to control everything, he started making better decisions. When he stopped operating from panic, he started seeing opportunities he had missed before. Now let's explore Psalm 91, which offers perhaps the most comprehensive picture of what it means to live under divine protection. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. The word dwells here is yashab, which means to remain, to abide, to make your permanent residence. This isn't about occasional visits to God when you're in trouble. It's about making His presence your home address, the place you return to again and again. The image of resting in the shadow of the Almighty is particularly powerful. In the harsh Middle Eastern climate where this was written, shade wasn't a luxury. It was a matter of survival. The shadow of a large rock or tree could mean the difference between life and death for a desert traveler. The psalm is saying that God's presence provides that kind of life-saving relief from the harsh realities of a broken world. But here's what makes this psalm so relevant to your current struggles. It doesn't promise that bad things won't happen. Instead, it promises that when they do happen, you won't face them alone. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. This isn't a guarantee of physical immunity from every possible danger. It's a promise that even when you walk through circumstances that destroy others, there's a protection available to you that goes beyond what you can see or understand. I counseled a woman named Beth, whose teenage daughter was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. The treatment was brutal, months of chemotherapy that left her child weak, nauseated, and barely recognizable. Beth watched other families in the oncology ward fall apart under the pressure. Parents divorced, siblings acted out, entire family systems collapsed under the weight of medical trauma. Beth herself felt like she was barely holding on. There were nights she would sit in the hospital bathroom and sob until she had no tears left, wondering how she was supposed to be strong for everyone else when she felt like she was dying inside. That's when her pastor introduced her to Psalm 91. At first, she was angry at the promises it contained. Where's the protection for my daughter? Where's the shield against this disease? But slowly she began to understand that the protection wasn't from the cancer. It was through the cancer. She wasn't being spared from the battle, but she was being given supernatural strength to fight it. She found herself able to advocate for her daughter with doctors, coordinate care between specialists, maintain hope when the prognosis looked grim, and hold her family together when everything felt like it was falling apart. The 1,000 falling at your side weren't other cancer families. They were the fear, despair, bitterness, and hopelessness that could have destroyed her spirit. Those things came close, but they didn't overtake her. She had found a shelter that provided protection not from the storm, but in the storm. This leads us to one of the most intimate psalms in the entire collection, Psalm 139. If you've ever struggled with shame, with feeling like you're fundamentally flawed, with the sense that if people really knew you, they would reject you, this psalm will revolutionize how you see yourself. You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. The word searched here is chakar, which means to examine thoroughly, like a physician studying an X-ray or a detective investigating a crime scene. God has examined every part of you, your motives, your failures, your secret thoughts, your deepest fears. And His response isn't horror or disappointment. His response is intimate knowledge that leads to love, not judgment. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. David is saying that being fully known by God isn't something to fear, it's something to marvel at. The word wonderful here is pala, which means extraordinary, surpassing beyond human understanding. Being completely known by the Creator of the universe and still being loved. is so far beyond what we can wrap our minds around that it leaves us speechless. But the psalm doesn't stop there. It goes on to declare something that has the power to heal the deepest wounds of rejection and self-hatred. I praise you, because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, I know that full well. The phrase fearfully made doesn't mean God was scared when he made you. It means you were made with reverent care, with awe, with the kind of attention an artist gives to their masterpiece. Think about what this means for the story you've been telling yourself about your worth. Maybe you've been convinced that you're too damaged to be loved, too broken to be useful, too flawed to matter. Psalm 139 offers a radically different narrative. You're not an accident or a mistake or a disappointment. You're a work of art, crafted with intentionality by someone who knows exactly what he's doing. I remember working with Kevin, a man in his 50s who had been carrying shame about his past for decades. He'd made some serious mistakes in his 20s, financial decisions that hurt his family, relationship choices that caused pain to people he loved, career moves that he regretted. Even though he had long since made amends and changed his patterns, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was fundamentally flawed, that his past disqualified him from any kind of meaningful future. When we started studying Psalm 139 together, Kevin initially resisted the idea that he was wonderfully made. "You don't know what I've done," he would say. "If God really searched me, he'd be disgusted by what he found." But gradually, as we explored the original Hebrew meanings, as we talked through the theological implications, something began to shift in how he saw himself. The breakthrough came when he realized that the psalm was written by David, someone who had committed adultery, arranged a murder, lied to protect himself, and made countless other mistakes. Yet David could declare with confidence that he was fearfully and wonderfully made. Not because he was perfect, but because God's love and creativity transcended his failures. Kevin began to understand that his identity wasn't based on his performance or his past. It was based on God's intentional design. He started to see his mistakes as part of his story, rather than the defining feature of his story. He learned to receive God's love, not as someone who had earned it by being good enough, but as someone who was chosen and cherished regardless of his track record. This transformation in how Kevin saw himself rippled out into every area of his life. His relationships improved because he stopped trying to earn love and started believing he was worthy of it. His work became more fulfilling because he wasn't driven by a need to prove himself, but by a desire to use his gifts purposefully. Even his mistakes became opportunities for growth rather than sources of shame. Now let's turn to Psalm 23, perhaps the most familiar passage in all of Scripture, and discover layers of meaning that might completely change how you understand God's care for you. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. Most of us read this as a nice sentiment about God providing for our needs, but to understand the full power of this statement, you need to understand what shepherding looked like in ancient Middle Eastern culture. Shepherds weren't hired hands who showed up for a paycheck. They were owners who lived with their flocks, who knew each sheep individually, who would risk their lives to protect them from predators. They would guide the sheep to the best pastures, find sources of clean water, provide medical care for injuries, and search relentlessly for any sheep that wandered off. The relationship between shepherd and sheep was intimate, protective, and completely devoted. When David says, "The Lord is my shepherd," he's making an extraordinary claim about the nature of his relationship with God. He's not just another sheep in a massive flock that God manages from a distance. He's known individually, cared for personally, and protected constantly. This isn't generic divine benevolence. It's specific, intentional, one-on-one attention from the Creator of the universe. I lack nothing. The Hebrew word is chaser, which means to be without, to be in need, to lack something essential. David isn't saying he has everything he wants. He's saying he has everything he needs. There's a profound difference. When you truly understand that you're under the care of a perfect shepherd, you stop worrying about whether you'll have enough resources for whatever comes next. You learn to trust that what you need will be provided when you need it. But here's where the psalm gets really practical. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. Sheep are anxious animals by nature. They won't lie down if they sense any danger nearby. They won't drink from running water because they're afraid of being swept away. The fact that David can rest in green pastures and drink from still waters means he has complete confidence in his shepherd's ability to protect him. This is what I call supernatural rest. The ability to be genuinely peaceful, even when your circumstances would normally trigger anxiety. It's not about having perfect conditions. It's about having perfect trust in the one who's watching over you. When you really believe that God is your shepherd, you can rest even when there are predators nearby because you know he's keeping watch. I think about Carol, a single mother raising 3 children while working 2 jobs to make ends meet. She lived in a constant state of exhaustion and worry, always calculating whether there would be enough money for groceries, enough time to help with homework, enough energy to be the parent her kids needed. She felt like she was failing at everything and couldn't see any way to get ahead of the overwhelming demands on her life. When Carol first read Psalm 23, it felt like mockery. Green pastures and still waters. I'd settle for 5 minutes of peace and quiet. But as she began to understand the shepherd metaphor more deeply, she started to see that the peace the psalm described wasn't dependent on having easy circumstances. It was dependent on trusting that someone infinitely wise and powerful was managing the details of her life. She began to practice what she called shepherd moments throughout her day. When she felt overwhelmed at work, she would take 30 seconds to remind herself that her shepherd was providing this job and would give her strength to do it well. When she worried about her children's future, she would remember that the same God who was caring for her was caring for them too. When bills piled up, she would choose to trust that her provider knew about her needs and would meet them. The transformation wasn't immediate, and her circumstances didn't magically become easier, but she found herself able to sleep better at night, to be more present with her children during the time she did have with them, and to face each day's challenges with a sense of underlying security that hadn't been there before. She learned that green pastures and still waters weren't places. They were states of being that were available to her regardless of where she was or what she was facing. The psalm continues with words that speak directly to anyone walking through difficulty. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. The Hebrew phrase is valley of the shadow of death, not just difficulty, but circumstances that feel life-threatening, situations where you can't see any way forward, times when you wonder if you're going to survive what you're facing. But notice what David doesn't say. He doesn't say, I won't encounter dark valleys or I'll find a way around them. He says, I walk through them. The valley isn't avoided, it's traversed. The darkness isn't eliminated, it's endured. But here's the crucial difference. I will fear no evil, for you are with me. The presence of the shepherd changes everything about the valley experience. You're not walking through it alone, wondering if you'll make it to the other side. You're walking through it with someone who knows the terrain, who has all the resources you might need, who is committed to getting you safely to your destination. The valley is still dark, but it's no longer terrifying. This is the heart of what the Psalms offer to anyone carrying heavy burdens tonight. They don't promise to remove the valleys from your life, but they promise to transform your experience of them. They teach you how to find the presence of your shepherd even in the darkest circumstances, how to access peace that doesn't depend on everything being okay, how to discover that you're never as alone as you feel. As we prepare to explore the final Psalms that will complete your journey from burden bearer to burden releaser, I want you to understand that what you've been learning isn't just information, it's transformation. These aren't just comforting thoughts to help you feel better temporarily. They're truth deposits that are being made in your heart, establishing a foundation of trust that will serve you for the rest of your life. The Psalms you're about to encounter will show you how to find joy in the midst of sorrow, how to maintain hope when circumstances look hopeless, and how to become the kind of person who can offer strength to others because you've learned where true strength comes from. Your heart is about to discover what it means to truly rest, not because your problems have been solved, but because you've found someone infinitely bigger than your problems who has promised never to leave you alone. The final psalm that will anchor your transformation from overwhelmed to overflowing is Psalm 42, and I need you to understand something profound about this ancient prayer before we dive in. This isn't just poetry about spiritual dryness. It's a roadmap for anyone who feels like they've lost their connection to hope, purpose, or even their own sense of who they are. As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God. The Hebrew word for pants is ta'arog, and it describes the desperate gasping of an animal that's been running from predators, whose very survival depends on finding water immediately. This isn't casual thirst. This is life or death desperation. The psalmist is saying that his need for God has become as urgent as his need for oxygen. But here's what most people miss when they read this verse quickly. The deer isn't just thirsty, it's being hunted. In ancient Israel, hunters would chase deer for hours, driving them away from water sources until the animals were so exhausted and dehydrated that they could barely stand. The image isn't just about spiritual dryness. It's about feeling pursued by circumstances that have driven you far from everything that used to nourish your soul. Maybe that's exactly where you find yourself tonight. You've been running from one crisis to another, one deadline to another, one disappointment to another, until you can barely remember what it felt like to feel spiritually alive. You're not just tired, you're soul-thirsty in a way that goes deeper than physical exhaustion. You're desperate for something to restore what feels like it's dying inside you. I counseled a woman named Patricia who described this exact feeling. She had been caring for her mother with dementia for 3 years, watching the woman who raised her slowly disappear behind a disease that stole memories, personality, and recognition. Patricia felt like she was drowning in grief for someone who was still alive but no longer present. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt joy, hope, or even basic contentment. I used to love reading my Bible, she told me. I used to feel God's presence when I prayed. Now I sit there and feel nothing. The words just bounce off me like I'm made of stone. I'm starting to wonder if God has given up on me, or if I've somehow moved so far away from him that I can't find my way back. This is where Psalm 42 becomes more than comfort. It becomes medicine. The psalmist continues, "My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When can I go and meet with God?" Notice that he doesn't say he's lost his faith or given up on God. He's saying he's lost his sense of God's presence, his ability to connect, his experience of divine nearness. He still believes God exists. He just can't feel him anymore. This distinction is crucial because it addresses one of the most painful aspects of spiritual dryness, the guilt. When you can't feel God's presence, when prayer feels empty and scripture feels dead, it's easy to assume something is wrong with your faith. The psalmist gives you permission to acknowledge that seasons of spiritual drought are part of the human experience, not evidence of spiritual failure. But then comes the verse that changed everything for Patricia. "My tears have been my food day and night, while people say to me all day long, 'Where is your God?'" The psalmist isn't ashamed of his tears or trying to hide his struggle. He's acknowledging that grief itself has become sustenance, that sorrow has become his constant companion, and that well-meaning people keep asking questions he can't answer. Patricia broke down when we read this together. "That's exactly what people keep saying to me," she sobbed. "They keep telling me that God has a plan, that Mom is in a better place even though she's still here, that I need to trust more. But I can't see any plan in watching her forget my name. I can't find God's goodness in this disease, and I feel terrible for feeling that way. Here's what I told Patricia, and what I need you to understand if you're in a similar place. The psalmist's honesty about his spiritual dryness isn't a lack of faith, it's deep faith. It takes tremendous trust to bring your real feelings to God instead of pretending everything is fine. It takes courage to admit you can't feel His presence instead of performing spiritual maturity you don't actually possess. The breakthrough in Psalm 42 comes in the form of a question the psalmist asks himself. Why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? This isn't self-condemnation, it's self-examination. He's not beating himself up for feeling discouraged. He's trying to understand what's happening in his inner world so he can respond appropriately. This is what I call holy self-talk. Learning to have conversations with your own soul that lead toward truth rather than toward despair. Instead of letting your emotions drive the narrative of your life, you step back and ask questions. Why am I feeling this way? What am I believing about God, about myself, about my circumstances? Are those beliefs actually true, or are they just the product of exhaustion and pain? The psalmist answers his own question. Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise Him, my Savior and my God. Notice the word yet. It implies future tense, not present experience. He's not saying he feels like praising God right now. He's saying he's choosing to believe that a time will come when praise feels natural again, when God's goodness becomes visible again, when the drought breaks and his soul finds refreshment. This is what I taught Patricia to do during our sessions together. Instead of trying to manufacture feelings she didn't have, she learned to anchor herself to truths that transcended her current experience. She would say things like, I can't feel God's presence right now, but I choose to believe He's still with me. I can't see His plan in Mom's illness, but I choose to trust that His love for both of us is bigger than this disease. I can't find joy today, but I choose to hope that joy will return. Kadib. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it did happen. Slowly, Patricia began to find moments of genuine peace in the midst of her caregiving responsibilities. She discovered that choosing trust in the absence of feelings was actually a deeper form of faith than the emotions-based spirituality she had relied on before. She learned to be present with her mother's illness without being destroyed by it, to grieve the losses without losing hope for what remained. This brings us to Psalm 130, which offers perhaps the most honest exploration of what it means to cry out to God from the depths of despair. Out of the depths I cry to you, Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. The Hebrew word for depths is ma'amakim, which literally means the deepest places, the bottom of the ocean, the place where light doesn't reach. This isn't surface-level difficulty or temporary discouragement. This is the kind of pain that feels like drowning, the kind of circumstances that pull you down so far that you can't even see the surface anymore. The psalmist is writing from a place of complete desperation, and he's not apologizing for it or trying to minimize it. He's simply calling out from where he is, trusting that God can hear him even in the depths. I think about Michael, a veteran who came home from deployment with PTSD so severe that he couldn't sleep, couldn't work, couldn't maintain relationships. The nightmares were constant, the hypervigilance was exhausting, and the guilt over things he had seen and done overseas was crushing him. He felt like he was living at the bottom of a deep well, looking up at a tiny circle of light that seemed impossibly far away. I keep waiting to feel better, he told me during one of our sessions. Everyone says time heals all wounds, but it's been 2 years, and I feel worse than ever. I'm starting to think this is just who I am now, broken, useless, stuck in this dark place forever. I don't even know how to pray anymore because I can't find words for what's happening inside me. That's when we discovered Psalm 130 together. Michael was initially resistant to the idea that his cries from the depths were actually prayers. How can desperation be prayer? How can feeling hopeless be worship? But gradually, he began to understand that the psalmist was modeling something revolutionary, complete honesty with God about the reality of human suffering. The psalm continues, "If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, so that we may fear you." This verse addresses one of the deepest sources of despair for anyone struggling with guilt, shame, or regret. The fear isn't just that God might not help, it's that God might not forgive, that past mistakes have disqualified them from receiving mercy. Michael carried enormous guilt about things that had happened during combat, decisions he had made, lives that were lost, moments when he had failed to act or had acted in ways that haunted him. The weight of that guilt was almost unbearable, and it convinced him that he deserved whatever suffering he was experiencing. He couldn't imagine that God would want to help someone who had done the things he had done. But Psalm 130 offered a different perspective. If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, who could stand? The implication is clear. None of us could stand if God held our failures against us permanently. But the psalm immediately follows with hope. But with you, there is forgiveness. Not might be forgiveness or could be forgiveness. There is forgiveness. It's not a possibility. It's a reality. The Hebrew word for forgiveness here is selicha, which means to pardon completely, to remove the guilt and penalty as if the offense never happened. This isn't partial forgiveness or conditional mercy, it's total restoration. The psalmist is declaring that God's capacity for forgiveness is greater than human capacity for failure, that his love is stronger than our shame, that his mercy triumphs over our mistakes. For Michael, this truth became the foundation for his healing journey. He began to understand that his PTSD symptoms weren't God's punishment for his past actions. They were the natural result of trauma that required treatment and care. He could seek help for his mental health while simultaneously receiving God's forgiveness for moral injuries he carried. He learned to separate the medical aspects of his condition from the spiritual aspects of his guilt. The psalm reaches its climax with these words, "I wait for the Lord, my whole being waits, and in his word I put my hope." I wait for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning, more than watchmen wait for the morning. The repetition of more than watchmen wait for the morning is intentional. It emphasizes the intensity of expectation, the certainty that dawn will come, the confident anticipation of relief. Watchmen in ancient cities would stand guard through the darkest hours of the night, protecting the community from enemies who might attack under cover of darkness. But no matter how long or difficult the night shift, they knew with absolute certainty that morning would come. They didn't hope it would come or wish it would come. They knew it would come because that's the nature of night and day. The psalmist is saying that his expectation of God's intervention has that same quality of certainty. Not because he can see evidence of it yet, but because he understands something fundamental about God's character. Just as dawn follows night according to natural law, God's deliverance follows suffering according to spiritual law. The timing might be uncertain, but the outcome is guaranteed. This kind of waiting isn't passive resignation, it's active expectation. It's continuing to look for signs of breakthrough, continuing to position yourself to receive help when it comes, continuing to hope even when hope feels difficult. It's the difference between giving up and holding on, between despair and endurance, between being defeated by delay and being strengthened by it. Michael learned to apply this principle to his healing journey. Instead of viewing each difficult day as evidence that he would never get better, he began to see them as part of a process that was moving toward restoration. He started celebrating small victories, a night with fewer nightmares, a social interaction that didn't trigger anxiety, a moment of genuine laughter. He learned to wait for the Lord with the same confidence that watchmen wait for morning. Now let's turn to our final psalm, one that will tie together everything we've discovered about releasing burdens and finding rest. Psalm 103 begins with a command that might seem impossible when you're overwhelmed. Praise the Lord, my soul. All my inmost being, praise his holy name. How can you praise God when your heart is heavy? How can you bless his name when you're struggling to get through each day? The answer lies in understanding what biblical praise actually is. The Hebrew word barak doesn't mean to feel happy emotions about God. It means to acknowledge his worth, to recognize his character, to declare what is true about him, regardless of how you feel in the moment. Praise isn't about your emotional state, it's about God's unchanging nature. David continues, "Praise the Lord, my soul, and forget not all his benefits." The word forget here is shakach, which means to neglect, to overlook, to fail to remember. David is commanding his own soul to actively remember God's faithfulness instead of passively forgetting it. This is crucial because memory becomes selective when you're in pain. You tend to remember every disappointment while forgetting every provision, every failure while overlooking every success. The psalm then lists specific benefits to remember: who forgives all your sins and heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from the pit and crowns you with love and compassion, who satisfies your desires with good things so that your youth is renewed like the eagles. This isn't a promise that you'll never get sick or never face difficulty. It's a declaration that God is in the business of restoration, taking what's broken and making it whole, taking what's dead and bringing it back to life. I counseled a man named James who had lost his job, his marriage, and his sense of purpose all within the span of 6 months. He felt like his entire life had collapsed, like everything he had worked for had been stripped away. When I suggested we study Psalm 103 together, his initial response was bitter laughter. Praise God? For what? For destroying everything I cared about? But as we worked through the psalm verse by verse, James began to recognize benefits he had overlooked in his pain. Yes, he had lost his job, but that job had been slowly killing his soul with its demands for ethical compromises. Yes, his marriage had ended, but it had been broken for years, and the divorce had freed him from a relationship built on resentment rather than love. Yes, his old sense of purpose was gone, but maybe that was an opportunity to discover a truer purpose. This process of remembering God's benefits doesn't deny the reality of loss or minimize genuine grief. Instead, it places current pain within the context of God's larger pattern of faithfulness. It helps you see that what feels like the end of your story might actually be the beginning of a new chapter you couldn't have imagined before. The psalm reaches its most comforting promise in these words: "As a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. For he knows how we are formed, he remembers that we are dust." God isn't surprised by your limitations, frustrated by your weaknesses, or disappointed by your struggles. He made you from dust, and he remembers that fact when you're falling apart. The Hebrew word for compassion here is racham, which comes from the word for womb. It describes the tender, protective love a mother feels for the child she carried in her body. God's compassion for you isn't detached sympathy. It's intimate, personal, nurturing care. He doesn't love you despite your frailty. He loves you with full knowledge of your frailty. This truth transformed how James saw his season of loss. Instead of viewing his struggles as evidence that God had abandoned him, he began to see them as evidence that God was restructuring his life with the same tender care a surgeon uses to repair a damaged heart. The process was painful, but the purpose was restoration. The losses were real, but they were making room for something better. As we come to the end of our journey through these life-changing psalms, I want you to understand that what you've received tonight isn't just comfort for your current crisis. You've been given a toolkit for the rest of your life, a collection of spiritual resources that will serve you through every season of difficulty you'll face from this moment forward. These ancient prayers have shown you how to find God's presence in the darkest valleys, how to release control of outcomes you were never meant to manage, how to discover peace that doesn't depend on perfect circumstances, and how to transform your relationship with suffering from victim to overcomer. But perhaps most importantly, they've taught you that carrying heavy burdens alone isn't noble. It's unnecessary. You have access to a strength that never fails, a love that never ends, a presence that never leaves. You don't have to pretend you're strong enough to handle everything life throws at you, because you were never supposed to handle it alone in the first place. The Psalms have shown you that authentic faith includes honest struggle, that spiritual maturity means knowing where to turn when you're overwhelmed rather than never being overwhelmed, and that God's power is most clearly displayed not in the absence of difficulty, but in the presence of His people walking through difficulty with supernatural grace. Tonight, as you prepare to lay down the burdens you've been carrying, remember that this isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where you walk with the confidence of someone who knows they're never alone, who faces tomorrow with peace, not because you know what it holds, but because you know who holds it, who can offer strength to others because you've discovered the source of all strength. You've carried enough today. Tomorrow's burdens don't belong in tonight's heart. The Psalms have taught you how to cast your cares on the one who can actually handle them, how to rest in the shadow of the Almighty, how to find streams of living water even in the driest seasons of your soul. Your heart can rest now, your shoulders can relax, your mind can quiet down. You've found your refuge, your fortress, your shepherd, and He will never let you walk alone again. The transformation that's happening in your heart right now isn't just about getting through tonight. It's about fundamentally changing how you approach every overwhelming season that lies ahead. You've been learning to speak the language of the Psalms, and that language becomes your native tongue when life gets difficult. It becomes the vocabulary you reach for when your own words fail you. But there's something else I need you to understand about what makes these ancient prayers so powerful. They don't just offer you comfort, they offer you identity. When you consistently turn to Psalm 23, you don't just receive the benefits of having a good shepherd. You begin to see yourself as someone worth shepherding. When you pray Psalm 139, you don't just understand that God knows you. You start to believe that being fully known by Him is actually wonderful rather than terrifying. This shift in identity is where the deepest healing happens. So many of the burdens you carry aren't just about difficult circumstances. They're about the stories you tell yourself about who you are in the midst of those circumstances. Maybe your story has been, I'm the person who has to hold everything together, or I'm the one who can't handle pressure, or I'm too broken to deserve good things. The Psalms offer you a completely different narrative to live from. They tell you that you're the sheep who is so valued that the shepherd would leave 99 others to search for you if you wandered off. You're the child who is so precious that your father keeps track of every tear you cry. You're the beloved who is so treasured that not even your worst mistakes can separate you from His love. I remember working with Elena, a perfectionist who had built her entire identity around never making mistakes and always exceeding expectations. She worked 16-hour days, said yes to every request, and lived in constant fear that someone would discover she wasn't as capable as she appeared to be. The anxiety was consuming her, panic attacks in the bathroom at work, insomnia that left her exhausted, and a persistent sense that she was one failure away from losing everything she had worked for. When Elena first encountered Psalm 131, she was confused by its simplicity. My heart is not proud, Lord. My eyes are not haughty. I do not concern myself with great matters or things too wonderful for me. But I have calmed and quieted myself. I am like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child, I am content. This didn't sound like the kind of prayer she thought she needed. Where was the petition for strength? Where was the request for wisdom to handle all her responsibilities? But as we explored the psalm together, Elena began to understand that David wasn't praying for more capacity. He was praying for peace with his limitations. He was choosing contentment over striving, rest over relentless achievement, being overdoing. The image of a weaned child with its mother isn't about helplessness. It's about security so complete that you don't need to perform or achieve to know you're loved. This was revolutionary for Elena. Her entire adult life had been built on the belief that her worth was determined by her productivity, that love had to be earned through excellence, that rest was something you could only afford after you had accomplished enough to justify it. Psalm 131 offered her a different way of being human, one where her value was inherent rather than earned, where she could lay down the exhausting burden of trying to be indispensable. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Elena had to practice what she called weaned child moments throughout her day. When she felt the familiar panic rising because she couldn't control an outcome, she would remind herself that she wasn't responsible for managing the entire universe. When perfectionist thoughts tried to drive her toward overwork, she would choose to trust that her worth wasn't tied to her performance. When the fear of disappointing others threatened to overwhelm her, she would remember that she was already completely loved by the one opinion that mattered most. This brings us to one of the most practical aspects of letting the Psalms transform your burden-carrying patterns. They teach you how to live with what I call sacred boundaries. So many people carry burdens that don't belong to them because they've never learned to distinguish between what God has called them to carry and what He hasn't. The Psalms show you how to be compassionate without being codependent, how to care deeply without carrying everything. Psalm 127 captures this perfectly. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for He grants sleep to those He loves. The psalmist isn't promoting laziness or suggesting that effort doesn't matter. He's pointing out the futility of trying to accomplish through human striving what can only be accomplished through divine blessing. Think about the areas of your life where you've been rising early and staying up late, where you've been toiling with anxiety rather than working with trust. Maybe it's your children's futures, your marriage, your career, your health, your finances. The psalm isn't saying these things don't matter or that you shouldn't work toward good outcomes. It's saying that your frantic efforts to control results are actually counterproductive, that there's a way to work hard while resting easy. This is what sacred boundaries look like in practice. You give your best effort to the things God has placed in your hands, and you release control of the outcomes to Him. You love your family deeply without carrying the weight of their choices on your shoulders. You pursue excellence in your work without tying your identity to your achievements. You care for your health without living in fear of every possible threat. I counseled a father named Robert whose teenage son was struggling with addiction. Robert had tried everything: interventions, treatment programs, moving to a different city, changing schools, monitoring every aspect of his son's life. He wasn't sleeping, wasn't eating properly, and had essentially put his own life on hold to try to save his child. The effort was destroying his marriage, his health, and his relationship with his other children. "I can't just stop caring," Robert told me, when I suggested that some of what he was carrying didn't belong to him. "He's my son. If I don't fight for him, who will?" This is the heart cry of anyone who has confused love with control, who believes that caring means carrying responsibility for outcomes they can't actually influence. Psalm 127 helped Robert understand that there's a difference between building a house and trying to be the foundation. He could provide structure, support, resources, and boundaries for his son, but he couldn't provide the internal motivation for change. That had to come from his son and from God. Robert's job was to be faithful in his role as a father. God's job was to work in his son's heart in ways that Robert couldn't. Learning to live within these sacred boundaries transformed Robert's relationship with his son's addiction. Instead of frantically trying new strategies every week, he became consistent in offering love with clear limits. Instead of carrying the weight of his son's choices, he learned to grieve them while maintaining hope. Instead of sacrificing his marriage and other relationships on the altar of his son's crisis, he understood that his family needed him to be healthy and present, not consumed by anxiety. The breakthrough came when Robert realized that his frantic efforts to control his son's recovery were actually motivated more by his own fear than by love. He was terrified of losing his child, terrified of being seen as a failed father, terrified of facing a future where his son didn't overcome addiction. When he learned to bring those fears to God instead of channeling them into controlling behaviors, everything changed. This leads us to another profound way. The Psalms reshape your relationship with heavy burdens. They teach you the difference between carrying weight and bearing witness. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone who is suffering is not to try to fix their situation, but to sit with them in it, to acknowledge their pain without minimizing it, to offer your presence without trying to provide answers. Psalm 88 demonstrates this beautifully. It's one of the darkest chapters in the entire Bible, ending without resolution, without hope, without a neat theological bow tied around the suffering it describes. You have taken from me friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend. Why would God include such a bleak prayer in Scripture? Because sometimes that's exactly where people are, and they need to know that even their darkest moments are not beyond the reach of prayer. When someone you love is walking through their own version of Psalm 88, your calling isn't to talk them out of their pain or to provide spiritual platitudes that minimize their experience. Your calling is to bear witness to their struggle, to affirm that their pain is real and valid, to sit with them in the darkness without trying to turn on lights they're not ready for yet. I think about Sarah, whose best friend was diagnosed with terminal cancer at age 34, leaving behind 2 young children and a husband who was completely unprepared to become a single father. Sarah felt helpless, watching her friend face treatments that offered little hope, conversations with children too young to understand why mommy was sick, and the overwhelming task of trying to prepare her family for a future without her. Sarah's initial impulse was to try to fix everything, to organize meal trains and fundraising campaigns, to research experimental treatments, to fill every moment with activities that might distract from the reality of the diagnosis. But what her friend needed most wasn't Sarah's solutions. She needed Sarah's presence, her willingness to sit in the hard place without trying to make it easier, her permission to be scared and angry and heartbroken without having to protect others from those emotions. The Psalms taught Sarah how to be present with suffering without being consumed by it. She learned to offer practical help without trying to control outcomes, to listen to her friend's fears without trying to talk her out of them, to hope for healing while simultaneously accepting that healing might not come in the form she wanted. She discovered that bearing witness to someone's pain can be just as sacred as bearing their practical burdens. This kind of presence requires what I call emotional boundaries, the ability to care deeply without drowning in someone else's emotions, to offer support without taking responsibility for their healing, to maintain your own spiritual and emotional health while walking alongside someone who is suffering. The Psalms model this perfectly. David expresses genuine anguish about his circumstances while maintaining his connection to God, acknowledging his pain while refusing to let it have the final word. Now let's explore how the Psalms teach you to handle one of the most challenging aspects of releasing burdens, the fear that if you stop carrying them, something terrible will happen. This fear keeps many people trapped in cycles of anxiety and control long after they've intellectually understood that worry doesn't help. The deeper issue isn't just learning to trust God with your circumstances. It's learning to trust that He can handle them better without your constant supervision. Psalm 121 addresses this fear directly. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, He who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The psalmist is essentially saying that God is the ultimate insomniac. He never goes off duty, never takes a break, never gets distracted or overwhelmed. This means you can actually sleep at night. You can turn off your phone without worrying that you'll miss something crucial. You can take a day off without everything falling apart. You can stop rehearsing worst-case scenarios in your mind because someone infinitely more capable than you is managing the details of your life. The mountain you keep looking at, wondering how you'll ever climb it, is being watched by the one who made it. But here's where it gets practical. Learning to trust God's sleepless vigilance means developing what I call holy rhythms, patterns of rest and work that reflect your belief that you're not the most important person in the universe. It means going to bed at a reasonable hour instead of staying up late trying to solve problems you can't actually solve. It means taking weekends to rest instead of using every free moment to catch up on responsibilities. It means saying no to commitments that would stretch you beyond your capacity to do anything well. I worked with Lisa, a small business owner who had convinced herself that her company would fail if she wasn't personally involved in every decision. She checked emails at midnight, worked every weekend, and hadn't taken a real vacation in 5 years. The business was successful by external measures, but Lisa was exhausted. Her family felt neglected, and she lived in constant fear that one day off would result in disaster. When we studied Psalm 121 together, Lisa's first response was defensive. That's easy to say when you don't have employees depending on you for their livelihood. That's fine when you don't have customers expecting immediate responses. God helps those who help themselves, right? But as we dug deeper into the psalm, Lisa began to see that her frantic work habits weren't actually helping anyone. They were symptoms of a deeper fear that she couldn't trust anyone else, including God, to care about her business as much as she did. The transformation began when Lisa started taking what she called Psalm 121 breaks during her workday. Instead of checking email for the 15th time or obsessing over a client proposal, she would step outside, look up at the sky, and remind herself that the same God who hung the stars was perfectly capable of managing her business concerns. She began to delegate more responsibility to her employees, not because she stopped caring about quality, but because she realized that her micromanaging was actually preventing them from developing their skills. The breakthrough came when Lisa took her first real vacation in years and discovered that not only did her business survive without her constant presence, but her team actually performed better when they weren't walking on eggshells. Around her anxiety, she returned refreshed, more creative, and better able to make strategic decisions because she wasn't constantly operating from a place of fear and exhaustion. This brings us to one of the most transformative truths the Psalms reveal about burden carrying, that many of the weights you think you're responsible for actually belong to God, and trying to carry them is not only unnecessary, but counterproductive. There's a difference between being responsible to God for your choices and being responsible for God's job of managing the universe. Psalm 55 makes this distinction clear. Cast your cares on the Lord, and He will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken. The Hebrew word for cast is shalak, which means to hurl, to throw with force, not to politely hand over. This suggests that releasing your burdens to God isn't a gentle spiritual exercise. It's sometimes a violent act of surrender, a forceful rejection of the lie that you have to carry everything yourself. But notice what follows. He will sustain you. The word sustain is kul, which means to contain, to support, to provide what's needed. When you cast your cares on God, you're not left empty-handed. You're sustained, supported, provided for in ways that your own strength could never accomplish. The energy you were spending on worry gets redirected toward the things only you can do, while God handles the things only He can do. I counseled Maria, a single mother who was carrying not just the practical burdens of raising 3 children alone, but the emotional weight of trying to be both mother and father, the financial stress of making ends meet on one income, and the constant guilt that she wasn't doing enough in any area of her life. She felt like she was failing everyone and couldn't see any way to get ahead of the overwhelming demands. "I don't have the luxury of casting my cares on God," Maria told me initially. "If I don't worry about these things, who will? If I don't figure out how to pay for school supplies and groceries and car repairs, my kids will suffer. God isn't going to write me a check or fix my transmission." Her resistance was understandable. She had been let down by people who had promised to help and then disappeared, and she wasn't sure she could trust anyone, including God, to actually follow through. But as we worked through Psalm 55 together, Maria began to understand that casting her cares on God didn't mean becoming passive or irresponsible. It meant doing her part with peace instead of panic, making decisions from wisdom rather than fear, asking for help instead of trying to be superhuman. She learned to separate the things she could actually control from the things she could only worry about, and to focus her energy on the former while releasing the latter. The practical changes were small but significant. Instead of lying awake at night calculating and recalculating her budget, Maria would pray over her finances and then get the sleep she needed to make good decisions the next day. Instead of trying to anticipate and prevent every possible problem her children might face, she taught them practical skills and then trusted that God would provide wisdom for situations she couldn't prepare them for. Instead of carrying the guilt of everything she couldn't provide, she celebrated the love and stability she was giving them. The transformation wasn't that all her problems disappeared, but that she stopped carrying them alone. She found herself able to ask for help when she needed it, to receive assistance without shame, and to trust that God was working through the community around her to provide for her family in ways she couldn't orchestrate herself. Her children noticed the change, too. Instead of a mother who was constantly stressed and overwhelmed, they had a mother who was present, peaceful, and confident that their needs would be met. This leads us to the final and perhaps most important truth about releasing burdens that the Psalms teach, that letting go of what you can't control actually increases your effectiveness in the areas where you do have influence. When you stop spending emotional energy on things beyond your power, you have more resources available for the things within your reach. When you stop trying to manage outcomes you can't actually manage, you become better at managing the choices that are truly yours to make. Psalm 37 captures this perfectly. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. The progression here is crucial. Commit, trust, be still, wait patiently, don't fret. Each step builds on the previous one, creating a pathway from anxiety to peace. The phrase, commit your way, uses the Hebrew word galal, which means to roll away, like rolling a heavy stone off a tomb. Your way, your path, your plans, your future gets rolled away from your shoulders onto God's. This isn't a one-time transaction, but a daily practice, a moment-by-moment choice to keep rolling the weight back to Him every time you feel tempted to pick it up again. But here's what makes this more than just spiritual theory. When you truly commit your way to the Lord, you find yourself making different choices. You stop saying yes to commitments that stretch you beyond your capacity because you're not trying to prove your worth through productivity. You stop avoiding difficult conversations because you're not carrying the weight of managing everyone else's emotions. You stop procrastinating on important decisions because you're not paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong choice. I think about David, a pastor who was struggling with the pressure of trying to meet everyone's expectations in his congregation. He felt responsible for every person's spiritual growth, every family's problems, every conflict that arose in the church. The weight of trying to be all things to all people was crushing him, and he was considering leaving ministry altogether because he felt like he was failing everyone who looked to him for guidance. When we studied Psalm 37 together, David initially resisted the idea of committing his ministry to God. "But I am committed to God," he protested. "That's why I'm working so hard, why I'm available to everyone, why I can't say no when people need me." But gradually, he began to see that there was a difference between being committed to God and trying to be God. His frantic efforts to meet every need and solve every problem weren't expressions of faithfulness. They were symptoms of a Messiah complex that was exhausting him and actually hindering his effectiveness. The breakthrough came when David realized that his job wasn't to be successful in everyone's eyes, but to be faithful to what God had actually called him to do. He began to distinguish between the needs he was equipped to meet and the needs that belonged to other people or to God himself. He learned to offer his best in his areas of gifting while referring people to other resources for needs outside his expertise. He discovered that saying no to some things allowed him to say yes more fully to the things that were truly his to carry. The result wasn't that David became less caring or less available to his people. The result was that he became more effective in his core responsibilities because he wasn't spreading himself so thin that he couldn't do anything well. His preaching improved because he had time for proper preparation. His counseling became more helpful because he wasn't rushing through sessions to get to the next crisis. His leadership became stronger because he was making decisions from a place of rest rather than from exhaustion and overwhelm. As we prepare to close this transformative journey through the Psalms, I want you to understand that what you've received tonight goes far beyond comfort for your current struggles. You've been given a new operating system for your soul, a completely different way of processing difficulty that will serve you for the rest of your life. You've learned to distinguish between the burdens that are yours to carry and the ones that belong to God. You've discovered how to find peace in the midst of chaos, how to rest even when storms are raging, how to trust when you can't see the outcome. But perhaps most importantly, you've learned that you were never meant to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. That job was already taken by someone infinitely more qualified, infinitely more powerful, infinitely more loving than you could ever be. Your job is to be faithful in your corner of the kingdom, to love well within your capacity, to trust deeply in every circumstance. The Psalms have taught you that authentic strength isn't about never needing help. It's about knowing where to find help that actually works. They've shown you that real faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about knowing the one who does. They've revealed that genuine peace isn't about having perfect circumstances. It's about having a perfect refuge when circumstances are imperfect. Tonight, as you finally lay down the burdens you've been carrying for far too long, remember that this isn't just about getting through your current crisis. This is about stepping into a completely different way of being human, a way that acknowledges your limitations without being limited by them, that faces uncertainty without being paralyzed by fear, that experiences pain without being destroyed by it. You've learned the language of the Psalms, and that language will become your native tongue in every season of struggle that lies ahead. When anxiety tries to overwhelm you, you'll know how to cast your cares on the Lord. When loneliness threatens to consume you, you'll remember that you're never truly alone. When circumstances feel out of control, you'll find your refuge in the one who controls all circumstances. The transformation that began in your heart tonight will continue for the rest of your life. You'll find yourself becoming the kind of person others turn to for strength because you've learned where real strength comes from. You'll discover that you can offer hope to the hopeless because you've found hope that doesn't depend on circumstances. You'll realize that you can comfort others with the comfort you've received, that you can share peace because you've learned where peace is found. Your shoulders can relax now, your mind can quiet down, your heart can finally rest. You've found your shepherd, your refuge, your fortress, and he will never let you carry anything alone again. The burdens of today don't have to follow you into tomorrow. The fears that have been consuming your thoughts don't have to shape your future. The weight you've been carrying doesn't define who you are or determine where you're going. You are loved beyond measure by the one who spoke stars into existence. You are known completely by the one who knit you together in your mother's womb. You are held securely by the one who will never leave you or forsake you. And in that love, in that knowledge, in that security, you can finally rest. The Psalms have done their work in your heart tonight. They've reminded you of who you are and whose you are. They've taught you how to release what you cannot control and embrace what you can. They've shown you that you don't have to be perfect to be loved, strong to be valuable, or successful to be significant. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, its own opportunities, its own invitations to trust. But you won't face them alone. You'll face them as someone who knows where to turn when the path gets difficult, who has learned to find streams of living water in the driest seasons, who can sleep peacefully because you know who's keeping watch. Your journey from burden bearer to burden releaser is complete. Your heart has remembered what it feels like to truly rest. Your soul has found its home in the shelter of the Most High, and nothing will ever be the same again. Rest is not something you have to earn through perfect circumstances or flawless performance. Rest is something you receive as a gift from the one who never grows weary, who never needs to sleep, who holds all things together by the power of his word. Tonight, you've discovered that the ancient prayers of the Psalms aren't just beautiful poetry. They're invitations into a way of living that transforms anxiety into trust, fear into faith, and overwhelming burdens into opportunities to experience divine strength. But I need you to understand something crucial as we bring this journey to a close. The peace you've found tonight isn't dependent on your ability to remember everything we've discussed or perfectly apply every principle we've explored. The transformation happening in your heart right now isn't based on your spiritual performance or your capacity to maintain these insights through willpower alone. It's based on something far more reliable, the unchanging character of the God who meets you in these ancient words. The Psalms work their healing power not because you understand them perfectly, but because they connect you to truths that are more solid than your fluctuating emotions, more dependable than your changing circumstances, more enduring than your temporary struggles. They anchor your soul to realities that existed before your current crisis began and will continue long after it ends. Think about what's different in your heart right now compared to when we started this journey together. The circumstances that brought you here tonight haven't changed. The difficult relationship is still difficult, the financial pressure is still real, the health concern is still concerning. The overwhelming responsibilities are still overwhelming, but something fundamental has shifted in how you carry those realities. You've learned to hold them differently, to process them through a different lens, to find your security in something deeper than their resolution. This is the miracle of the Psalms. They don't promise to remove every difficulty from your path, but they promise to change your relationship with difficulty itself. They teach you to see storms as temporary rather than permanent, challenges as opportunities for growth rather than evidence of abandonment, struggles as places where you can discover strength you never knew you possessed because it was never yours to begin with. I want to leave you with one final truth that will carry you through every season that lies ahead. The God who inspired these ancient prayers, who preserved them through millennia, who brought them to your attention tonight when you needed them most, is the same God who will walk with you through tomorrow's challenges and next week's uncertainties and next year's unknowns. His faithfulness isn't dependent on your circumstances staying manageable. His love isn't conditional on your ability to figure everything out. His presence isn't earned through your spiritual performance. You are held by a love that's stronger than your fears, wider than your understanding, deeper than your pain. You are known by a God who sees not just where you are, but where you're going, who understands not just your current struggle, but the purpose it serves in shaping you into who He created you to be. You are carried by a strength that never fails, never wavers, never grows tired of supporting you when you can't support yourself. The Psalms have taught you that you don't have to have perfect faith to access perfect love. You don't have to understand God's plan to trust His heart. You don't have to see the end of the story to believe it will be good. You simply have to rest in the truth that you are precious to the One who holds all things together, that your struggles matter to the One who knows every detail of your life, that your healing is important to the One who specializes in making all things new. Tonight, as you finally release the burdens you've been carrying alone for far too long, as you let your shoulders drop and your breathing deepen and your heart settle into peace, remember that this isn't just a temporary reprieve from your troubles. This is a homecoming to the way you were always meant to live, not as someone who carries the weight of the world, but as someone who is carried by the One who created the world. The ancient voices of the Psalms are still speaking into your story tonight, still offering their timeless wisdom to your contemporary struggles, still providing refuge for your weary soul. And they will continue to speak tomorrow and the next day and for all the days to come, whenever you need to remember that you are not alone, you are not forgotten, and you are not required to be stronger than you actually are. Your journey through the valleys of life will continue, but you'll never walk through them alone again. Your path will still have difficult stretches, but you'll never wonder if there's someone strong enough to help you navigate them. Your heart will still face seasons of testing, but you'll never doubt that there's a love great enough to sustain you through them. The Psalms have given you more than comfort. They've given you a new way of being human, a way that acknowledges struggle without being defeated by it, that faces uncertainty without being paralyzed by fear, that carries responsibility without being crushed by it. They've taught you the difference between being strong and being held by strength, between having answers and knowing the One who has answers, between controlling outcomes and trusting the One who controls all outcomes. As the night settles around you and tomorrow waits in the distance, let your heart rest in this final promise from the Psalms. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going both now and forevermore. This isn't a guarantee that nothing difficult will ever happen, but it's a promise that nothing difficult will ever happen outside the watchful care of the One who loves you more than you can imagine. You've carried enough today. You've worried enough, struggled enough, tried to figure out enough. Tonight, you can rest in the perfect peace that comes from knowing you are held, you are loved, you are never alone. Tomorrow's grace will be there when tomorrow comes, but tonight's grace is here now, surrounding you with comfort that passes understanding, wrapping you in love that casts out fear, covering you with peace that guards your heart and mind. The Psalms have done their work in your weary soul. They've reminded you of who you are and whose you are. They've taught you where to find strength when you feel weak, hope when you feel discouraged, peace when you feel overwhelmed. They've shown you that the God of ancient Israel is the same God who meets you in your modern struggles, that the comfort David found in his darkest valleys is the same comfort available to you in yours. Your heart can be still now. Your mind can be quiet. Your soul can rest. You've found your refuge and it will never fail you. You've discovered your fortress and it will never be shaken. You've come home to the love that has been waiting for you all along, the love that will sustain you through every season yet to come. Rest now, beloved child of God. You are safe, you are held, you are home. As we reach the end of this sacred journey together, I want you to take a moment to notice what's happened in your heart over these past hours. When you first clicked on this video, you came carrying burdens that felt too heavy to bear. Your shoulders were tight with tension, your mind was racing with worries, your spirit felt crushed under the weight of responsibilities that seemed endless. But something profound has shifted, hasn't it? The circumstances that brought you here tonight haven't magically disappeared. The difficult conversation you've been avoiding is still waiting. The financial pressure hasn't evaporated. The relationship strain hasn't suddenly resolved. The overwhelming to-do list hasn't shortened itself. But what's changed, and this is the miracle of what we've discovered together, is that you now know you don't have to carry any of it alone. The Psalms have done something extraordinary in your soul tonight. They've taken you from being someone who carries burdens to someone who knows how to release them. They've transformed you from a person who tries to manage every outcome to someone who can trust the one who actually controls all outcomes. They've moved you from exhausting yourself trying to be strong enough for everything life throws at you to discovering a strength that never runs out because it was never yours to begin with. Think about the specific techniques you've learned. You now know how to pray the Psalms with your body, letting your physical posture reflect the spiritual truth that you can lift your eyes to the hills and find help. You've learned how to step into the alternative narratives these ancient prayers offer, trading the stories of shame and inadequacy for the truth that you're fearfully and wonderfully made. You've discovered the rhythm of lament and praise, understanding that you can bring your raw emotions to God and trust Him to transform them into something beautiful. You've mastered the art of praying through your seasons, knowing that waiting has its own psalm, that loss has its own comfort, that overwhelming responsibility has its own relief. You've learned to find community even in your loneliest moments by joining your voice with the millions who have found these same words to be life and breath in their darkest hours. Most importantly, you've discovered that worship isn't about feeling happy emotions toward God. It's about acknowledging His worth regardless of how you feel, remembering His benefits when your memory becomes selective, and choosing to trust His character when you can't understand His methods. But here's what I need you to understand as we close. This transformation isn't something you have to maintain through willpower or perfect spiritual discipline. The peace you've found tonight isn't dependent on your ability to remember every technique we've discussed or flawlessly apply every principle we've explored. It's based on something far more reliable, the unchanging nature of the God who meets you in these ancient words. The Psalms work because they connect you to truths that are more solid than your shifting emotions, more dependable than your changing circumstances, more enduring than your temporary struggles. They anchor your soul to realities that existed before your current crisis and will continue long after it passes. You've learned that Psalm 46 teaches you to find God in the center of trouble, not absent from it. That Psalm 91 offers protection not from every storm, but supernatural strength to walk through storms that would destroy others. That Psalm 139 reveals you're not just tolerated by God despite your flaws, but treasured because of His intentional design in creating you exactly as you are. You've discovered that Psalm 23 isn't just a nice sentiment about divine provision, but a revolutionary understanding that you're under the personal, intimate care of a shepherd who knows you individually and will never lose track of where you are. That Psalm 42 gives you permission to acknowledge spiritual dryness without guilt, while pointing you towards streams of living water that can refresh your soul even in the driest seasons. You found that Psalm 130 validates your deepest struggles while declaring that God's capacity for forgiveness is greater than your capacity for failure. That Psalm 103 teaches you to actively remember God's benefits when your pain makes you forget His faithfulness. These aren't just comforting thoughts to help you feel better temporarily. These are truth deposits that have been made in your heart tonight, establishing a foundation that will serve you through every difficulty you'll face from this moment forward. They've rewired how you process anxiety, how you handle overwhelming circumstances, how you respond when life feels out of control. The person who finishes this video is fundamentally different from the person who started it. You're no longer someone who has to figure everything out alone. You're no longer carrying responsibility for outcomes that were never yours to control. You're no longer trying to be strong enough for challenges that require supernatural strength. You've become someone who knows where to turn when the path gets difficult. Someone who can sleep peacefully because you trust who's keeping watch. Someone who can face uncertain tomorrows with confidence, not because you know what they hold, but because you know who holds them. This is your new identity, not as someone who never struggles, but as someone who knows where to find help when the struggling comes. Not as someone who never feels overwhelmed, but as someone who has discovered a refuge that's bigger than any storm. Not as someone who has perfect faith, but as someone who has found perfect love that casts out fear. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, but you'll meet them differently now. When anxiety tries to spiral, you'll know how to cast your cares on the Lord. When loneliness threatens to consume you, you'll remember that you're never truly alone. When circumstances feel chaotic, you'll find your stability in the one who never changes. The Psalms will continue to be your vocabulary when your own words fail you. They'll be your first response to difficulty rather than your last resort. They'll shape how you interpret challenges, how you respond to setbacks, how you find hope when situations look hopeless. You'll discover that you've become the kind of person others turn to for strength because you've learned where real strength comes from. You'll find yourself able to offer hope to the hopeless because you found hope that doesn't depend on circumstances. You'll realize you can comfort others with the comfort you've received because these ancient prayers have taught you how to receive comfort that never runs out. The transformation happening in your heart right now will ripple out into every relationship, every responsibility, every area of your life. You'll approach your work differently because you're not trying to prove your worth through productivity. You'll engage in relationships differently because you're not carrying the weight of managing everyone else's emotions. You'll make decisions differently because you're not paralyzed by the fear of getting it wrong. You've learned the difference between being responsible to God for your choices and being responsible for God's job of running the universe. You understand now that there are sacred boundaries, ways to love deeply without carrying everything, ways to care passionately without being consumed by anxiety. As I close, I want you to remember that the God who inspired these Psalms, who preserved them through millennia, who brought them to your attention tonight when you needed them most, is the same God who will walk with you through every season that lies ahead. His faithfulness doesn't depend on your circumstances staying manageable. His love isn't conditional on your ability to have it all figured out. You are held by a love stronger than your fears, wider than your understanding, deeper than your pain. You are known by a God who sees not just where you are, but where you're going, who understands not just your current struggle, but the purpose it serves in shaping you into who He created you to be. Tonight, as you finally release those burdens you've been carrying alone for far too long, remember that this isn't just temporary relief. This is a homecoming to the way you were always meant to live, not as someone who carries the weight of the world, but as someone who is carried by the one who created the world. Your shoulders can drop now, your breathing can deepen, your mind can quiet down, your heart can finally rest. You found your shepherd, your refuge, your fortress, and He will never let you walk alone again. The burdens of today don't have to follow you into tomorrow. The fears consuming your thoughts don't have to shape your future. The weight you've been carrying doesn't define who you are or determine where you're going. You are loved beyond measure. You are known completely. You are held securely. And in that love, in that knowledge, in that security, you can finally rest. Your journey from burden bearer to burden releaser is complete. Your heart has remembered what it feels like to truly rest. Your soul has found its home in the shelter of the Most High, and nothing will ever be the same again. Rest now, beloved. You are safe. You are held. You are home.